Good evening from Boston College. I'm Bert Howell, and I'm the Executive Director of Intersections. I welcome you to the Show at 6, BC and the Common Good. The Show at 6 features friends and members of the BC community discussing a range of issues affecting our world today, all revolving around the theme of the common good. Topics include how the BC community is responding to the effects of COVID-19, to the enduring challenges of the marginalized, to our own resiliency and solidarity, and to the upbuilding of human dignity throughout the world. The show is based on the central insight of the common good. That is, that the resources that humanity has and needs must be shared equitably. For instance, today each of us is called to promote the common good by social distancing, by wearing masks, and by washing our hands. These practices, like other forms of solidarity, are not only for our own good, but for the common good. In many of the previous segments, we heard repeatedly about the disparities in healthcare, employment, and education that lead African American and Latinx neighbors to be much more at risk to the pandemic. At the same time, the brutal killings of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, Rayshard Brooks, and George Floyd highlight all the more how white privilege, anti-Blackness, and other forms of racism endanger the lives of our brothers and sisters. We are, at BC, a Jesuit Catholic school committed to being men and women for others. We know that through solidarity and a commitment to the common good, we can beat the virus of COVID-19, but we must be no less committed to defeating the virus of racism that destroys the lives of so many. At 6:40, my co-host and I will ask our guests questions from the audience. Members of the audience can pose a question before 6:40 p.m. via the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. Let me repeat that. Members of the audience can pose a question before 6:40 p.m. via the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. They should identify themselves by their name and relationship to BC. I'm delighted to host this segment tonight with Regine Michelle Jean-Charles. She's an associate professor of Romance languages and literatures and African diaspora studies at Boston College. She is the author of Conflict Bodies, The Politics of Rape Representation in the Francophone Imaginary. Her latest book on contemporary Haitian literature is under contract with the University of Virginia Press. She is a board member of A Long Walk Home Incorporated. Regine?
Thank you so much, Bert. I'm glad to be here. It's always good to see everyone. It is my pleasure to introduce my friend and my colleague, Dr. Amy Victoria Atkins-Jones. Dr. Atkins-Jones is an assistant professor of theology and core faculty in the African and African Diaspora Studies program here at BC. She's a graduate of the University of Virginia and Duke Divinity School and received her PhD in religion from Duke in 2016 with a certificate in feminist theory. She was the first African-American woman to graduate from the program in the field of Christian theological studies. She is currently finishing her first book, Immaculate Misconceptions, a Black Mariology of Liberation, that asks what kinds of bodies are seen as available for consumption, and offers a theological account of Christian purity and the rise of the global sex trade. A Baptist minister, Dr. Atkins-Jones also brings a pastoral sensibility to her work and teaching around issues of identity and justice. A respected poet, photographer, and trained iconographer, her essays have appeared in several venues online and in print. So keep in mind that she is truly a triple threat, an academic, an artist, and an activist. Thank you so much for being here, Amy Victoria. It's a pleasure to chat with you.
Thank you so much. It is wonderful to be here, to be with our BC and extended community, and to be with wonderful colleagues and friends.
So my first question, I actually want to begin by honoring Dr. Sean Copeland, our beloved and now sadly retired colleague, who we know is largely responsible for bringing you to BC. She wrote an essay earlier this summer about it, I think at the beginning of this month, entitled Breath and Fire, The Spirit Moves Us Toward Racial Justice. In it, she asks, can we allow ourselves to be moved by the spirit, Ruah, to understand what it would mean to be able to breathe freely in America? I think of you as someone who really embodies this idea in your scholarship and in your activism and your teaching. And I would love for you to share with the rest of the folks on with us here tonight about how the spirit has moved you towards not just racial justice, but justice in general.
I was asked recently, what motivates you in life, to do different things. And, whether whether it was during, as a student, or whether I was working, in design or whatever else, like what's the end goal? And for me, the first thing that popped into my mind, I didn't have a prep for that question or anything like that, was justice. I was raised that, to really just believe, was raised with very humble beginnings. I was raised in the middle of nowhere. There was no Walmart or McDonald's or multiple stoplights. There's more cows than people where I am from, and really a farming, agriculturally based and manufacturing based town in southwestern Virginia. And so what I witnessed growing up, was that people took care of one another. And if someone didn't have groceries, we got them groceries. And if someone needed wood cut, you cut their wood. And then when you needed, your snow plowed down, then someone would come help you plow, the snow. And it was a very racially divided community. I also went to school in a place where there was KKK on every desk, and where there were restaurants that we didn't go to. There were areas, Doe Run and Shooting Triple Creek, where you didn't go because Black people didn't belong there. And so that tension, that reality of life that shaped and molded me, one, I think is deeply reflective of much of our country, and the ways that socioeconomic divides have only entrenched racial divides in many places and spaces outside of urban areas, but also this differing sensibility that because access looked different, because capitalism even looked different, that we were still responsible for one another, that we were meant to take care of one another. And so when I think about, fire and spirit, I think about, when I think about who inspires me, I think about, my grandmother. I think about the first theologians in my life reading their Bibles and saying, hey, we are supposed to act a certain way towards others. We are supposed to live a certain way. We're supposed to live righteous and holy. And that wasn't just about, what clothes are appropriate to wear or policing this, that, or the other, but it really was, and in the truer sense, I think of some of the Hebrew there, it really was about how we imagined community together and what our accountability to that was. And so I do think that there is a certain fresh wind and fresh spirit in this moment, and it really is, it's fresh in that we have some new questions being asked, but it's also expanding and joining together with folks who've been asking these questions and who've been pressing and who have been experiencing injustice on this level for years and years and years before a pandemic hit and before we were isolated enough to actually take the time to pay attention to what was going on in our country, particularly around police violence.
Thank you so much. I love how you talk about really an ethic of care that animates your view of justice. And that also made me think about, you made this point about imagining communities. And one of the things I think that you really excel at is actually creating community, right? And so I would love for you to just share about how you create community, whether it's in the classroom, in your neighborhood, in other spaces that you've lived, even when you lived abroad, and how that ethic of care is at the core of your creation of communities.
Well, I think that, you have to admit, like, I'm an introvert. And so but I also realized in isolation how important community is. Like, community is no less important to me just because I really enjoy being alone. I don't enjoy being this alone. So I've always, I've frequently found myself in spaces where I didn't know anyone. I've also found myself in spaces where I felt excluded or as an outsider, or where I wasn't necessarily welcome. And I have always also been influenced or taught in such a way that, you should never leave anyone behind. That you're only, a strong, those kinds of very often sports adages, right? Like you know, you're only as strong as your weakest link, and like nobody's the weakest link. And you know, we all finish together. We start together, we finish together. Nobody's free until all of us are free. And so I think when you have a lot of that instilled in you, but also when you experience it from the other side, it only takes it doesn't take much for someone to extend their hand to you, like once or twice, for you to realize, like for you to start extending your hands to others, right? Like you don't forget those moments, those people in your life who take the time for you. And so that has really informed not only my own, you know, successes and experiences and lessons in life, like someone has taken the time for me, but also it really informs what motivates me to continue pushing forward and pushing myself. I'm not particularly motivated by myself. I think that I'm somewhat ambitious, sure, but if it were just for me, and I didn't have children in mind or community in mind or continuing to break down barriers in mind, then, you know, so many obstacles can be thrown in your path. I would have given up already. It's like, why do this? And so that keeps me going. And for me, it's centered in not only an ethic of care, but also a sensibility about wanting to continue to learn and wanting to grow and wanting to blossom. And so of the things that I love about teaching is that I'm always learning from my students too. And I love the environment where we are able to grow and experience and be on a path and on a journey together. I love that in every aspect of my life. The idea really truly of, you know, let's cultivate, let's dig up, let's plant, let's bear fruit, all of those sort of wonderful analogies that really make the difficult times and difficult conversations worthwhile. And so I try to do that wherever I can. And I also sometimes, you know, describe myself as a displaced Southerner. And so I'm also, so apparently I come off generally as maybe a little more hospitable, friendly, whatnot. But Regine, something that, some language that I could borrow from you, actually, my dear friend and mentor, is that we also, in terms of thinking about hospitality and presence with one another and the gift and the dignity and the humanity of everyone. For me, I think that hospitality is something, you know, a part of who I am. And we never know when we're entertaining angels. And so I don't take that for granted in our different spaces that we inhabit. The joy and the gifts and the graces, if you will, of everyone that you come across, and wanting to build that, wanting to cultivate that, wanting to bring people together. You know, being a connector, if you will, liking being connected. And so it brings me a lot of joy, and honestly, a lot of wonderful gifts and graces that I can't imagine, you know, beforehand. So I try to make everyone welcome. I think that that's a very simple, easy thing to do that can really be have an immense impact in a world that just doesn't always feel welcoming for everyone.
Thank you so much for that.
Well, Amy, Victoria, I've known students who've taken your classes, and I can vouch for them and say that you are somebody who practices that hospitality in the classroom as well as other parts of your life. I want to ask you a question because I remember you saying once that your father was famous for a saying in your family of no grit, no pearl. And this is a question about resiliency, one of the themes of our segment tonight. But you changed that statement when you were growing up. You changed it to no grace, no pearl. And you've said that a source of grace for you is poetry. So I wanted to see if you could read a poem by Lucille Clifton called Won't You Celebrate With Me? And if you could read it and then answer the question, what does this poem mean to you, and what does it say about resiliency?
So the poem goes as such. It's one of my favorites. It has kept me in a very psalmic way, if you will, on many an occasion. And Lucille Clifton says, "Won't you celebrate with me what I have shaped into a kind of life? I had no model, Born in Babylon, both non-white and woman, what did I see to be except myself? I made it up here on this bridge between starshine and clay, my one hand holding tight my other hand. Come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed. That poem and the inspiration and joy and light of much of Lucille Clifton's poetry, I hold very dear, particularly because I, in the past few years, went through a very serious, near-death experience. One that was very painful, and one that I've spoken about elsewhere and have spoken about on campus, but where I woke up with a very severe case of bacterial meningitis and didn't know it. And when I think about not only how I've processed what it means to have come so close to having everything just dissipate in a moment. I remember the things that I thought about, when I was conscious enough to say, wait, like, are these my last moments in life? And the things that I thought about were not necessarily the things that I had given my attention to on a day-to-day basis. And they were not the things that other people are constantly telling me or constantly telling us as a society are important about who we are and how we contribute and the work that we do. And so I considered myself a pretty grounded person prior to that. But really, when you are faced in that moment, your priorities, even if you think that you have prioritized well, they will shift immensely again. And that poem, for me, reminds me that no matter what has come against me, that I don't face anything alone. I am a person of great faith, and so I've never felt more assured in my life that I, face battles with God, with a God who is for me and loves me and cares. I also have never been more assured that I face battles with, ancestors, with a cloud of witnesses, with those who come before me, who have laid groundwork, those living and those dead, those who work in community. I've never before been more assured of the goodness and the grace that comes from, and the reward that comes from holding dear what is right and what is good and what is kind and what is loving and what is beautiful and what is true and what is just. And so for me, that poem, it lives in several places, in like physical form in my life, but it reminds me to celebrate. We're living in a moment where Black death is on my heart and my mind, and is on the hearts and minds of so many. It has been for a long time. I think that the promo title of this, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it talks about zombies. I have a whole class where I talk about death, talk about zombies, and talk about how our anxieties about what happens after, or a mass tragedy, or what happens after we die, actually reflect that we're asking questions about whether or not we are living a good life and whether or not we have our priorities straight. And so what this poem reminds me, one, in this moment, is something that Amani Perry, I think, described really beautifully in an article she wrote recently. It's that Blackness and my life is not defined or determined by death or violence or pathology, but that Blackness is an immense and defiant joy. And this poem reminds me that there is so much for us to celebrate, even in a world that seems like it's falling apart. And that commitment to celebration, that commitment to joy is not only necessary for our continued resistance and our continued sensibilities of revolution, but is in and of itself an act of resistance and an act of revolution that says that you may try to kill me, and you may actually even kill my physical body, but you cannot kill my spirit, and you cannot kill my soul, and you cannot kill this message, and you cannot kill an entire ethos and spirit and ethic of a community and of goodness. And so I need that on days that are hard, and I need that on days where I'm watching the news and cannot believe what I'm seeing. I need that reminder, and I'm grateful for that.
Clifton is so skilled at packing all of that in those lines. And thank you for reading it and unpacking it for us and talking about what it means to you. It makes me think of how important poetry is. And I wish schools taught students how to memorize poetry as a regular course. I think we've lost that. It seems like it's a lost art. And I would start with Lucille Clifton as the first poet that we should have young people be memorizing all the time.
I think that the gift of being able to recall words and recall memories, to truly remember, is something that's, admonished in scripture. But it again reminds me so much of how I grew up and the elders around me and the way that they would quote the poetry of the Bible. And even when I was a little girl, we had vacation Bible school. We did Bible drills. And so you got candy if you were really fast and you could find, some obscure thing in the Bible. But if you already had something memorized, right, you could, we had to do all of these things. But it wasn't just, a children's game, but really I think being taught and instilled that the words that we write on our hearts, are things that we carry constantly with us, and that is important. And as Audre Lorde said, especially in times of turmoil, poetry is not a luxury, So I'm with you on that.
So, for me as a person of faith and a Black feminist, I often find myself frustrated by the church for a number of reasons, but most recently in response to the Black Lives Matter uprisings and how, I've been seeing these messages about like, we're becoming an anti-racist church and, all these messages coming out. And I think it's largely because, like Audre Lorde, who you just mentioned, I really do believe that we cannot have single issue struggles because we do not live single issue lives, right? As someone who I know takes intersectionality or thinks intersectionally and lives intersectionally and thinks intersectionally about social justice issues, I want to know from you, what do you think is missing in this moment? And how do we move to a more complete and more robust and more complicated perspective?
I think that what is missing in this moment I think that what's missing in this moment are relationships. So one of the things that I have noticed in conversations and even the quick move to elevate or amplify, certain voices and conversations, I think that those are important steps. But I don't think that we have really taken seriously how imbricated our individual issues are with the social structures of our country and how deeply involved the church, big C, little c, the history of the church, and particularly the history of the Christian church in America, as it's been involved in colonialism, as it's been involved with the amassing of wealth and capitalism. I don't think that we've taken into consideration all the ways that has not only affected our ideas about race, but how theological ideas circulate as invisible norms, in ways that people have taken on to support their own personal agendas. Many of the political figures right now who are incredibly contentious, have no problem walking in front of a church and holding up a Bible. They're even after tear gassing people out of the way. So we have to think very carefully about how God is used and how we think about who God is. And I don't think you can do that without relationships. I've seen a lot of book clubs and a lot of people who are like, okay, I want to do something. And I think that is a very important aspect of creating change. And we all have to start somewhere, I'm not knocking anyone who is trying, but when we relegate issues to just our personal interactions, or when we continue to center ourselves, like how can I be better, right? I've seen some memes that say something to the effect of, hey, like anti-racism isn't like the latest, like shouldn't be like your, self-help improvement book, right? Like this, like there has to be some sort of weight and a movement to a shift in ethics that comes with self-reflection, and that comes with introspection, and that also comes with accountability and change. And so I think that, for me, we have to name the sinfulness of racism. We have to name the wastefulness of racism. We have to name that racism is tied to so many other factors of justice, eco-justice, our questions of the prison system, our questions of education, our questions of funding, our questions of our police, our policing, our questions of our legal systems, our questions of food access, our questions of oil pipelines. Like all of these things are related to one another. So much of it is related to following money. And the church has either been complicit directly or has, said, well, I don't have to worry about that in many, many instances and cases. So wanting to address the issue, wanting to be anti-racist, that is a really great thing to do, but and it's absolutely critical, but understanding that is a lifetime of commitment. That's not something that can be accomplished in a moment. That is something that is a painful reality. That is something that requires a deep commitment to unlearning, and it's something that will likely put into question who you imagine God to be, who you imagine the prophets to be, who you imagine Jesus to be if you are Christian. And if you're not, who you imagine, how you imagine community and spirituality and faith in ways that are going to be uncomfortable. And so, and in ways that are going to require more than inviting someone to church. And so I'm all for it and very supportive. But I do think that we have to be realistic about what the work actually is and what it will actually take. And that, it may require you letting go of who you thought Jesus was, especially if you think he was blonde and had blue eyes.
Oh, wow. I have so many responses, follow-up questions about that. Our friend Sean McGuffey, director of ADS, always said, his mother says, we're all swimming in the same dirty water, right? We're all swimming in the same dirty water. And if we think about racism as that same dirty water, then that means, for us individually too, right? So as you mentioned earlier, your commitment to learning, your commitment to unlearning. And so I want to hear more about, you said this is a first step, right? And so it's a lifetime commitment. So I want to hear just a little bit more about that lifetime commitment for you. And what are some areas that you've had to be pushed on, right? What are some areas that you've been made uncomfortable and you've had to learn more?
Yeah, I think there's so many areas to learn and to continue to grow in. One, just because you are Black and have experienced oppression does not mean that you have not internalized that oppression. And so it's not that, it's the way that sometimes people imagine, especially in the US, right, on mission trips, how people imagine those who are poor or though the least of these, right? Well, one, are people, exoticized in all these other countries, right? Like imagining themselves to be this? Or, what does it mean that like we're able to place labels on how other people feel? The other thing is that, oftentimes those who live in extreme circumstances of poverty are ascribed like this beautiful joyfulness that people love to opine about, as if you can't be angry or as if those things don't exist together, right? Like it's the flattening of the complexities of a situation and how one is perceived, and also that somehow like being poor like would make you a good person, right? Like the ways that we think and ascribe virtue, and then who is that actually for? Like what work is that actually doing? I would say the same thing. Just because, Black people are not monolithic. Black churches, which is, I come from a Black church tradition and a Baptist Black tradition, are not monolithic, are not created equal. Do not all also, affirm that all Black lives matter, right? All of these questions, these are complexities. And so we still have to continue to grow together. The church that I grew up in does not necessarily, attend to the same theological beliefs that I have developed now. And so that requires work. I wasn't born, a Black feminist. That required work. I had to read, that required reading and being in community and learning and being pushed on different ideas. I didn't know anything about the prison system until I was in divinity school. And I had people in my family who had been incarcerated. And it was just one of those, oh, well, you're good or you bad or you obeyed the law or you didn't. And it's just, it's that simple, right? I didn't know. And so ignorance, in the definitive sense of like, I don't know something, that is not inherently a moral evil or wrong. What is wrong is when you've been exposed to something or you had the opportunity to learn and you insistently turn a blind eye, or you build an opinion and a platform and one that has social repercussions, not having done your work. And so my challenge is that we all have to constantly be doing our work. As a professor, that means constantly thinking about universal design in my classroom, right? Like changing accessibility, changing, challenging some of the things that even I was taught with, or, knowing some of the things that I don't want to do or don't want to replicate. That means constantly doing that. As a parent, I am constantly, you want something that's going to challenge you. Have kids. And so I just had a baby, and then I am a bonus mother, full-time parent to 3 older children, and who have different questions than I had in 5th grade, who are facing very different challenges than I had in 5th grade. So, constantly learning and unlearning and being humble enough to say, you know what, I was wrong, and so I'm going to change. And I know how to do research. So I don't have an excuse. I think we all do. Everyone is, even the least computer literate in my family, like they know how to Google. So we can ask questions and we can learn, and we have to listen to those who may not be the voices or the embodiments that we normally take to be authoritative or we normally take seriously in our lives, because that too has been shaped in a multitude of ways that involve different dynamics of power and preference and privilege. And so there's all sorts of ways that, once we are exposed and once we know, there are all sorts of ways where we still see through a glass darkly, right? Like dimly. But when things come to light, when truth comes to light, we should embrace that as an opportunity to grow. and not live in fear of losing some way of life or losing some aspect of privilege that we've become more attached to than the idea that, through scarcity, than the idea that there's enough for all of us, and that we are called to live in abundance, that we can live in a world where people have enough, because we do have enough. It's just that we have some problems with our distribution and redistribution.
I wanted to ask you, Victoria, about two things you've been talking about that interest me a lot. The first is you've used the word imagine or imagination a couple of times, and then also the collective sin of racism. So imagination attracts me because of the Ignatian tradition, where the prayer practice in Ignatian spirituality kind of calls us to use our imagination. And so I want to ask you a question. When you pray, how do you imagine people acting collectively to reconcile, to repent for this collective sin of racism?
Yeah, I think I don't know that my prayers have manifest in a particular way of saying, and this is how we come together. What my prayers more reflect, the imagery that comes to mind, because I do think and live right now, I gave birth, and then I was socially distanced before it was official. I've been socially distanced since the end of December, and also my child, was putting up curtains when we were trying to give her an eviction notice, like, get out. Okay, so I was alone, isolated for quite some time. And when I imagine a world now, I'm imagining it through my daughter Judah's eyes. And what will the world be like for her? I have no idea. So much has changed even since she was born, and she was born in 2020. And so thinking about that, I don't, and I have not experienced and have not really read about change as like a top-down thing, right? Like that's going to get you into, what some theologians might want to discuss as like the Constantinian problem, right? Like when top down, it's like, all right, now we're all going to be this, and we're all going to be that. There's going to be some questions and probably some problems around that. But I imagine a world where all of these very small, or seemingly small, like collective pools, like spring up, like well springs, like coming up. And then as they come up in different places, as they join together, we form lakes and we form rivers, and, we are all feeding together the same sensibilities of living water that can carve through, the deepest of rocks, that can carve out, new spaces and new areas of flow and freedom, and even the driest of deserts. And so I think not only in terms of this imagery of water and living waters, but also that's where I look for hope and inspiration. I'm not particularly looking at, a presidential election for restoration. But I am looking at, how our neighbors next door, came together to make sure that someone else was provided for. I am looking at how our church communities have bound together. I am looking for, these daily quotidian signs of hope that, when accumulated, can be the momentum that changes the world. I think that is actually how movements have always worked. So many times we get the figures and the charismatic leadership, and that's how things are remembered. But it's been the people who, baked pies behind the scenes and used the money that they sold to fund, a Montgomery bus boycott, right? It's oftentimes been the women behind the scenes. It's oftentimes been folks who were not on platforms and who were not necessarily giving speeches, but who were in the trenches day and day, educating, planting food, thinking of new worlds, creating new ways to be. And so it's those signs of resistance that I dream about, and that I see and witness and hope to be more present to, especially as we've all been as we've all been centered so much more in our own homes and communities due to the pandemic, thinking of new ways of being together. And so across Zoom, whatever you're doing over there and here, like at some point, we're going to be able to come back together, and hopefully we will be attentive listeners, but also very active doers as well.
I love that image of well springs coming together, and the kind of flow of change. And it reminds me of John Lewis, who, when he was preaching to the chickens as a really young guy, and then as sort of not anyone who was famous, but came together and worked with others. And I especially admire his impatience, that we need to change now. But I also admire how much of a fighter he was over time, how I guess, to use your image, how deep that well was that he kept drawing from. And I know that faith was important to him, and I think your faith is really instructive to me as what's needed. So thank you.
Thank you, Bert.
And I think Regine has a question from the audience that she wants to.
Oh, yes. Okay, sorry. I was excited because I thought I was getting another question for me, but of course, let's open it up. Okay, so this question is from none other than Martin Summers, professor of history and African Diaspora Studies. He would like you to speak a bit more about the distinction that you made between the Big C and Little C Church and how it relates to challenging white supremacy on an interpersonal and systemic level. Thank you, Martin.
Yes. So I happen to be not Catholic. And so that, but with deep respect for, I also am a Mariologist. So, it evens out, I suppose. But I think that we have to think about, and what has really been challenged in this moment theologically, is what it means when you can't go to church. This has been something that has torn the edges of many people's faith, not only because of how they theologically understand receiving, the Mass, body and blood of Christ, but also understanding what a building or what a space, what sacred space looks like, and how it performs itself in our lives, and why that's important. And so there's been a lot of, hot takes on everybody, like anybody who's going to church, right? Like it has been endangering lives. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that that's not true or that's not the case. But what to me is more important in the longer term, right? Like the immediacy of getting some churches, especially some churches who were like defiant, right? Like the problem of a theology that says, well, God loves us and so we aren't going to get sick. And then half your congregation getting sick, right? Like this is a theological problem. But also recognizing, and for me, like being part of a faith community, wondering what is the anticipatory grief of the loss of community, right? Assuming that not everyone can Zoom, assuming that there are those who have not figured out how to be connected. I wonder about those people who we've lost along the way. And so there are a couple of different levels of thinking about the invisible church, right? Who we are as Christians, whether we are able to gather together or not. And that has been a question that, Christians have had to ask themselves, whether they were in catacombs or under persecution, or, worshiping out publicly, like through history. But also what I think that allows us to do is to say, hey, you can be Christian and you can love the community that you're in. You can love your particular denomination. You can love the traditions and tenets of your faith. But that also does not mean that we always get it right. And in fact, we have frequently, and I do say we, have frequently gotten it wrong and continue at times to do so. So what that means within different hierarchies and how we question and persist while we resist in the midst of that, but also thinking and taking very seriously that the church, the Catholic Church, many other denominations have a lot of money and have very sordid histories, and have not all been able to take seriously those histories in a way that not only shows social justice commitments, but that has reparations involved, that that thinks differently about our social ills, that wants to combat and name things like racism, things like sexism, things like homophobia, things like transphobia, and the ways that our theologies have promulgated that, the ways that people rely on some of our theologies to support the hatred that they have and that they exhibit in the things that they do. And that this is not new to 2020. This has happened forever. And so what do we want to do about that? And taking that very seriously, sometimes people want to excuse themselves as Christians. Well, I'm not that kind of Christian, or that's these folks are. No, it's a part of our theology. It's a part of our history, and so we have to take that seriously and be honest about it, and then root it out. So there's a lot more I could say about that question, but it's saying that I am a deeply committed Christian, and I love, I love these aspects of my faith. And because this is always the thing that you get questioned about. It's like, well, is she even really a Christian? If you're saying, that's what people immediately attack is, right, your identity. It's like, well, I mean, I don't know. I guess you tell me, right? But pretty sure I am. But, I think you can have that and also have a stringent critique of your own history, and not be ashamed or feel guilty or back down on things that are not right, good, or just.
I have another question here for you, Amy Victoria, from Seguin Francis, BC class of 2019. She asks, as you mentioned community being such a big motivating factor for you, how do you balance your dedication to hospitality and being open to entertaining angels with checking your community when it's not motivating you?
I think that, so we're a university environment, and you are taught to be a critical thinker. And in most of your classes, critique is equated to deconstruction. And critique is equated to undermining someone's point or proving them, proving a better point than what they had, right? It's this very sort of legal defense approach, very apologetic approach to thinking and to life. And that's not realistic, because you don't choose who your parents are, and you don't choose who your children are, and you don't always choose who you're in community with. And so if your approach in real life is just to throw out and to cancel, right, and to put in the trash, right, cancel culture, all of this stuff, every single person who doesn't agree with you or who is not as woke as you, we are going to end up never listening to one another and never really being open to change. Now, that's not the same thing as, undergoing the amount of distress, right? There's also these very online realities of trolling and doxing and all of these things. Yes, that's one thing. But also, what does it mean for us to want to journey together and to have a commitment to journeying together. I don't think we have to journey with everybody. I don't think everybody's journey, everyone's path is the same. But I do think that it is important to journey together, not out of a sense of deficit, but out of a sense of aspiration and hope. And that takes community to sustain, because there's a lot that's not hopeful about our world. But I say that to say that my commitment to critique is a critique out of love. If you love me and I am wrong, you will tell me that. And you will tell me in a way and help me in a way if we have that relationship, right? I was talking about, I think that part of what's missing is relationships. You're not going to learn about Black life from reading books. You have to somehow, and that's not to say seek out like tokens in your life, but you're not going to just learn, you're not going to be able to sit and learn about whiteness because you read a book by yourself and now you get it. You're not going to learn about privilege that way. We are interconnected. And so we have to be honest and open about those interconnected, how interconnected we are. The clothes that we wear, like other people have touched our clothes and are touching our bodies. Like we are constantly, our food, where is it coming from? Everything that we even ingest has other people's hands and stories and hearts and pains and joys invested in it too. So to me, critique has to come from a place of love, and love demands it. Justice demands it. And that is really, really hard. And it can be incredibly risky. But there are things that are worth the risk. And to me, creating a better world for myself, for my kids, for my friends, for my family, for people I do not know and will never meet, but leaving the world a better place than I entered into it. I didn't find it, it found me. And so wanting to see something better requires difficult work, and that's a part of it too. And sometimes that ends in loss, but sometimes it also ends in immense surprise and joy. And I think that it is worth it. You just also have to be around others to help, we have to hold each other up through it, because there's a lot of pain that comes when you're honest. And that's not just about race.
I love that so much. It reminds me of what Brian Stevenson says about being proximate, right? That the work of justice requires that we be proximate. Okay, so this question is from an anonymous attendee who says that they attended your Agape Latte and heard you speak at Fort Boston. And each time they hear you speak, I learned so much and my heart is changed for the better. What inspired you in the first place to teach a class on facing death and zombies, which you'll also be offering in the fall? How has this course changed for you following your near-death experience? I would add, and also your experience of having life inside of you, giving birth. And how has this course changed for you in light of police brutality and Black death in general, and especially in the recent months?
Yeah. So my grandfather owns a funeral home. And I have been proximate to death and the rituals of death, but also the rituals of remembrance and nostalgia and memory and the celebration of life for a very long time. I would say that there are many family members of mine who are very close to me who are also very gifted in the work and committed to hospice work, who have been gifted and trained and skilled in transitioning people through as they are nearing closer to death. And so I've also been able to witness that as well. And in terms of the class, like I happened to really, when I first started teaching the class, Walking Dead had just come out. And so I actually just really liked the show too. But I had deeper questions about the show. And not only knowing the different, historical, religious implications of the zombie or the zombie in Haitian culture, all of these ideas about death and how they were resonating and circulating in different ways. But there was a question about how zombies were presenting themselves and presenting questions of ethics and of life with respect to a group of people who we would consider other, right? So the way that zombies have been narrated and the anxieties around, well, what do we do, and how being faced with, an other in a different way changes and shifts our questions about ourselves. Well, to me, it was like, well, zombies are are proxies for questions about race, questions about colonialism, questions about mass pandemic illness changing the rest of the world, questions about mass tragedy. And so I was interested in that because I also think that our anxieties about death reflect our questions about what's a good life. And that's a question that I wanted to ask, but also that I wanted to interrogate from my own interest, because for so many, there have been things worse in life than the prospect of their death for people. So what does that mean, and what does that look like in our world? That has changed. I don't completely know how that has changed in terms of my own experience. I was supposed to be teaching this course and then I got sick. So this will be my first time investigating this course. But the course has historically talked about how cadavers and bodies and medical experiments too have been used, about people like Henrietta Lacks, whose cells were taken from her and cultured and used around the world for healing, but that, the reparations for her family and the suffering that she endured, so many aspects of our medical system, that's an aspect of the course. But so in terms of my own personal experience, I'm sure that it will be interesting to re-engage some of these materials, even though I already had a sensibility about medical racism and, even the what's considered the industrial, the funeral industrial complex, something that a lot of people don't really realize how all this works. But it will, I am shifting my course not only because it is taught remotely, so shifting and thinking differently about the configuration of the course and how we'll communicate with one another. But also, I think that I will learn a lot from the students. One of the first assignments of the course has historically been that you write your own eulogy. And so that's a really interesting ask at this point in our collective moment. So there's definitely discussions and still things to be held and thought through in terms of the pandemic, and in terms of the latest iterations of Black Lives Mattering and Trans Lives Mattering and so many other questions that we're facing together. But I think that these are discussions that these are discussions that are really real. It's a little scary to have right now, like in the midst of it, right? Like in medias res, like we aren't through this yet. But also I can't imagine more important discussions and a more important space to have with students coming to campus for the first time or not, or coming from all different backgrounds. And I feel very lucky and blessed and honored to be able to create spaces like that. So join us and see if you'd like. I like to leave space for imagination and surprise. So
I hope some people on this call will join that class.
Absolutely. I have the bad news of saying that we're out of time. I could go on and on. I just want to say a couple of words of thanks. There are many blessings to me for being a part of university life. One of them is just when you can gather so many great minds together in one place. But I think a place like BC, the goodness is multiplied when you can take intellectuals and scholars like Amy Victoria and like Regine, who were so distinguished in their intellectual life, but also combine that with their own personal faith and collective faith. This is a powerful combination in my mind. I rely on your strength in this fight for justice that we all need to be a part of, and that we can better realize the common good. So thank you for your witness. And thank you for this conversation tonight. It's been absolutely delightful, and I'm so grateful that we could have it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bert, for that. And M. Sean Copeland says at the end of that essay that I cited in the beginning that the Spirit's gifts equip the assembly of God to further the mission of Jesus and strengthen the common good. And so I think there's a lot of strengthening of the common good that needs to be done. And on that note, thank you, Amy Victoria. I want to invite everyone also to attend our next event for the show at 6. It will be featuring Vincent Rougeau, the Dean of the Boston College Law School. And the hosts are Greg Kalsher, the Professor of Law and the Dean of the Morrissey College, and Kathleen Cavani, the Darlud and Juliet Libby Professor of Theology and Law. And just as it will be on July 28th. That's 4 days from today. 5 days from today? Okay, 4 days from today. We're all forgetting what days we're in here in this pandemic life. At 6 p.m., so July 28th at 6 p.m. And please recall that you must register for these events. You must register for each segment that you want to attend. Registration is very brief. Each seminar has a webinar link, and you can look at our webpage, bc.edu/show@6. to see the next segment. While you're there, you can also look at the archives where all of the previous segments are being posted. So thank you again so much, Amy Victoria, to you. Thank you for your spirit. Thank you for your words. Thank you for all that you contribute to our Boston College community. It'll be so good to have you back after this leave this semester. And thank you to you, Bert, always for your partnership. And thank you to everyone for being with us. Be well and stay safe. Good night from Boston College.